Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the TV Pilot's License. With service to Madison Avenue and the Sterling Cooper Advertising Agency, we ask that you please fasten your headphones, secure your podcasting device, and remember that on this flight, you are allowed to smoke cigarettes, but only Lucky Strike. Sorry, those are the rules.
Welcome to the TV Pilot's License. My name is Jeff Purvis, joined by Rich Inman and Max Singer. How are you boys doing today?
I'm good, but I'm really realizing we need a slogan for this. We need someone to really punch up the TVPL branding.
Oh my god. Rich.
And my suit's in the wash right now, so I'm sorry for being unprepared for this podcast.
Well, boys, this week we are talking about Mad Men, for those who did not pick up on the couple of clues that we added. But with us approaching this topic and this show, we decided to bring an expert into our cockpit. Our guest this week is the co-host of the preeminent New York City history podcast, the Bowery Boys. They are now on their 17th year of creating entertaining, educational, and digestible stories about the city they love. You can find the Bowery Boys anywhere you find your podcast, but please welcome Greg Young. Greg, welcome to the TV Pilot's License.
Hey guys, thanks for having me here for our little coffee clatch or whiskey clatch or cocktail clatch, I guess if it's Mad Men, right?
Yeah, we're on Pacific hours over here, but we'll still have it. We'll still join you for some whiskey.
All right, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, okay? So, you know.
Yeah, there might be something in my coffee. Who knows?
Yeah.
You'll never know. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. When we were talking about, shows that really strike a chord with you when it comes to the history of New York, you actually brought up Mad Men. So I'd love to hear a little bit about why Mad Men.
Yeah, it's funny. I had, I could rattle off 8 or 9 other shows immediately, but this one was always the top of the list. It has a deep connection with me. The first episode of Mad Men debuted exactly 1 month to the day after our show's first episode.
Oh, cool. Oh my gosh.
So we have been maybe we should have quit when Mad Men did, but it started right at that moment. And then, I started watching it. It was it's like peak TV era type show here. And it was all about New York City. I totally loved it. And then one day I had a friend who's like, you need to do more than just watch this. And, I hadn't unfortunately, this is why I joined Twitter, because then they're like, oh, you need to tweet during the episodes. Because these shows are so deep in history and people want to know more about the history. So from I guess season 3 or whatever, I started just writing a bunch of articles about it and doing a bunch of social media and just getting so deep into all the shows. And of course, falling for all of these characters and really appreciating what they were doing on that show and how they were looking at history, by doing it in an entertaining fashion. And not everyone can do that right, that balance. And so that's why it's always appealed to me.
Well,
Yeah,
and Greg, for what it's worth, Mad Men only made it 7 years. You're on 17 with the Bowery Boys, so congratulations. You're,
Matthew Weiner, take a note.
Yeah.
Still waiting for our TV deal, actually, but
all right.
That's another story.
This is the first chapter of that.
Yes,
the
of course.
The TV executives listening now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have been a Bowery Boys fan for quite a while now.
Oh, cool.
I moved to New York in 2016, and within the first month or first couple of weeks, I found your podcast, and because I wanted to learn more about the city where I was living and the historical impact of every place I was visiting. Because it's so small, but it feels so just immense. There is just this feeling when you're walking in New York that so many things have happened in every place you are that you feel historically connected to each of them. And I am originally from Chicago, and Chicagoans feel like a very kindred sense of this, where we're obsessed with the history of our own city, for better and for worse. And the Bowery Boys really scratched that itch for me, and I've been a listener ever since. And I'm curious, now that you're 17 years into your show, how do you keep coming up with more captivating topics? How do you how do you keep talking about New York City with the excitement that you and Tom bring? Like, what do you use as inspiration for this?
Well, it's crazy because it's sort of like with one subject, you do that subject as a show, and then 2 years later you go back to that subject and you're like, wait, I learned like 10 more things. And then about that, like you take out that subject and there's 5 more subjects underneath it. And I think we've just gotten better at finding those stories and the stories that appeal. And honestly, New York City is sort of our like method of telling American history and of telling world history, of telling different women's history, of telling different kinds of history, and just following those strands as they come through New York. And, I think you can do that with a lot of major cities and with New York in particular, because it's, it's capital finance. It's the capital, it has like entertainment ties. It has lots of interesting political ties. It's cultural relevance. So you can just follow one of those roads for a while and find a good topic. And then by the time you do a number of them, you can just go back to the beginning and like redo. We sometimes redo shows in a completely different way because we've learned so much by that time.
I've really loved, I'm a big sports fan, so I started in very early, I scrolled all the way back to the ones you were doing on the Polo Grounds and Ebbets Field and everything. And I actually had the fortune to have my apartment across the street from the Ebbets Field location. So I got to see,
down in Lefferts Garden, Flatbush area. Cool.
And so I got to see basically my street, depicted in so many old pictures of people going to Dodger games there. And I don't know, I just felt this really deep connection. And Max is grew up in Sheepshead Bay.
Well, my dad did. I'm not.
Oh, that's right. Oh, okay, that's right. And Jeff's both of his parents are from New York too. So there's definitely a collective appreciation for the city. And
it's one of these places that everyone has a connection, whether they realize it or not. And even if they can't trace it through their own personal connections, it's either glamorized or, as we know, in some media outlets, demonized. There's people have an opinion on it, and I think that's the way with LA, Chicago. There's a few places that every American has some sort of opinion on. And so that also drives it. I mean, I would say more than half of our listeners don't even live in New York City. So that's it's, and it's because a lot of New York City things are national things. We try to actually do I try to do as many localized things as possible to balance out the big things, because I want to satisfy all of our different listeners. The ones that live here may not want to hear about the Chrysler Building. They might want to hear about this old diner that was down the street. So you just have to come up with balance the board a little bit so that you're doing a little bit of everything.
And tell me more about this diner.
So actually, we did I would say it's probably one of our most popular shows. We did a whole show called Diners, Luncheonettes, and Automats. And it was just a show.
I have listened to that episode.
So it's on a show just about working. How did middle class people eat in starting in the late 19th century? And Automats is some New York phenomenon. I'm sure it was in other cities as well, but in New York, there was a way of life for people that then went away. So there's also this this nostalgia thing that I think permeates all of our lives, whether we're watching Ghostbusters movies, or when you listen to podcasts, it's people want to hear about the things that were here 30 years ago, and that has great appeal.
I love that. So what would you say inspired you to start the Bowery Boys? And as over the course of 17 years, obviously the way you view New York, either when you started doing the podcast, it might have been with a lot of reverence, or possibly just excitement about the history. Has your lens of New York changed at all?
I would say we had a little bit too much irreverence back then that we've kind of slimmed down. I mean, we started it. So I should say my co-host is Tom Meyers, and we are old friends, and lived in the Lower East Side, following 9/11. And, for me, that at that moment, I got really into, I lived in the Lower East Side, which is one of the most historic districts in New York City. It's, and it has a heavily, religious presence. It's got a Jewish tradition, and I didn't know that much about it. So like sort of around that time, I decided to learn it on my own and started to take classes and sort of read things about it. And then Tom and I just lived 3 blocks away in the Lower East Side. So we sort of like, let's find out more about our neighborhood. And then that kind of collided with our performance personalities, I guess, because we wanted to do like, I mean, at that time, you
guys were doing UCB shows, right?
I did some stage work. Tom didn't.
Okay.
I did some stage work. I had a lot of friends in UCB. I was never in UCB, but I did a kind of another similar type of thing.
Okay.
So we were almost like, there was like an internet radio thing happening before podcasting. Like that was like half a moment when people's computers were fast enough that maybe you could stream audio on a radio. There's like these trends. I mean, now that I've been in forever, I noticed them myself. There's all these trends that happen in kind of people's interests, and it's usually shaped by pop culture. So like right now, everyone wants Gilded Age stories. Like they're like, we want to hear about the New York Gilded Age because of that TV show and the kind of like penumbra like that's created. Like everyone starts doing that, like things based on the Gilded Age, and it creates more overall interest. So back then it was gangs of New York. It was like mid-19th century and rough and tumble gangs and Herbert Asbury and all that stuff and the things that are represented in that movie. So our name of our show comes from one of the gangs, the gang that Daniel Day-Lewis's character is in. So that's where the name comes from. We're also like kind of nearish the Bowery. So and spend most of my evenings on the Bowery up and down. There was the vibrant bar scene of that 2000s. So that was sort of how we got the name. We sort of got into the idea of producing shows, which was really fun. And then all of a sudden I realized that like the more I'm learning, the more that I'm sharing, the more I understand about the city. Like all of a sudden I'm walking down the street, I'm like, wait a minute, this is the building that I just talked about 2 weeks ago where like this mob hit happened or whatever.
Yep.
And so then that really became the modus, the sort of objective of producing the show of like, well, maybe this show can open up everybody's eyes. And at first it wasn't even like for people outside of New York. It was like, well, this is just for people from New York to really understand what they're doing. And then realize that a lot of people out who don't live here, who are coming here to visit or just dream about New York, want to hear the same kind of stories. So that's sort of then cooked it up to the next level once that realization happened. So, and then, podcasting itself sort of grew. So we sort of got, we're still very small compared to the big podcast, but like we sort of got carried up into that wave as well. So
you did start, I will say to your credit, you did start 3 years before Mark Maron, who everyone feels like
that is crazy. That is wow. I feel like I've been listening to him
on
forever.
14 years.
Okay.
I know.
There was, I think, like Slate, the only podcast, I mean, I know there's actually podcasts that are older than us, but like, I think like Slate Political Gabfest is older. I was trying to think of the shows that I might have listened to in 2007. There were like a couple NPR shows, but yeah, I mean, it's been a long time.
So Greg, one of the things that you just brought up that I find so interesting is the idea of like pop culture being influenced or being the influence on what people are interested in, for sure. And, Mad Men was an era. Like, I very much just remember people started wearing more suits or out and about, People had more interest in that style of clothing, more interest in cocktail culture as well.
I'm not going to say gave birth to it, but I feel like all of a sudden everyone's spending a lot of money on cocktails and like, and old fashions, right?
So I'm curious from your perspective, as you think about like that baby boom, Madison Avenue, hippie culture era, that was really the beginning of it, if we think about it. How do you think Mad Men does in portraying the city through these various eras and various changes?
I mean, I'm not going to say every part of it is perfect because you're at the end of the day, they're driven by a storyline. And that's why you find so many shows that are so historically inaccurate, because it just becomes too difficult to like find that connection and make your stories work. So in context of that, I think Mad Men is almost flawless. I think, in somehow being able to reflect all these different aspects of the 1960s while barely being in New York at all. Like the filming of it is not really done there. I think the first episode, actually, the pilot, is ironically enough filmed in Queens.
Really?
At Silver Cup Studios, but then then it got moved out to LA. I think when they realized, hey, we can just do this in rooms. And quite honestly, I don't know this for a fact, but I imagine it might have something to do with the fact that it might have been too expensive to film in New York a period piece. I mean, there's a ton of filming in New York City, and Miss Maisel managed to do it somehow, but like it's so difficult to peel back a lot of parts of New York City and like get it back to a period that looks convincing. You have to do very close. I think they have to do for Maisel. They have to do very kind of close shots. So they don't show that like 1980s skyscraper in the background.
If you look really closely at Maisel, you could see Times Square Elmo passing by her.
A tiny Elmo. They didn't quite catch that in post production, but and again, like, but it also speaks to the exactness of that show and the attention to detail that they probably did that so that they didn't have that as an option, that they could create that universe in those studios in LA. And again, I compare that to other two iconic New York shows like Friends and Seinfeld, which are like Friends has nothing. Friends could be anywhere, to be quite honest, but like Seinfeld has New York-isms, but otherwise doesn't really depict New York in a full-bodied way, in the way that Mad Men manages to do that.
In fact, Seinfeld, if I'm remembering correctly, had a B team of cast lookalikes. If they needed to do an exterior shot, they wouldn't even fly Jerry Seinfeld out. They wouldn't fly Michael Richards out. They had their lookalikes basically doing exterior scenes from behind. They would shoot for like really low cost in New York.
I mean, they do manage to. I compare it a little bit to like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where I feel like I'm in Philadelphia in the show, even though like they don't always show Philadelphia.
No, they're in Van Nuys.
Right. And then like in Seinfeld, it's just the spirit. It's like the interactions. It's the situations that they create. But Mad Men, why do I want to keep Mad Men? I just saw Furiosa like 3 days ago. I'm sorry. Mad Men, it does, like the way that they do it, it says something about New York and America just in the way that they construct the screenplays, design the sets, create the costumes. I think it's incredible.
I want to get into a very specific plot point of Mad Men, as well as Maisel, as we've mentioned, and one of my favorite films, Carol by Todd Haynes. And that is, they all use department stores as a major plot point, specifically when telling women's stories. And I want to know what you think draws writers to using the department store as such a central focus and depiction of mid-century New York City, and how they use these hubs to capture the period.
Well, I think a large part of it is all of those creators want to tell stories about women in the 1950s and 60s. And if you did that if you're like, oh, I just want to tell stories about men in the 1950s and 60s, well, you go to City Hall because it's all full of men. You'll go to these office towers because it's, all the board members and all the CEOs are all men. But traditionally, women, like their domain has been domestic and has been shopping. And in New York in particular, which is really fascinating. I mean, Chicago also is like this sort of domain, this empire of the department store. Like the department store came in New York I
remember Sears and Marshall Fields being like a huge part of the landscape when I was a kid, and then like immediately going away as soon as I was a teenager, like just complete collapse.
And by the way, they are sort of tied together with advertising, and because Chicago has a huge advertising scene, late 19th century as well. But so with the department store, it's in Europe. They have palaces, and here in New York we have different kinds of palaces. And in New York, in particular, the largest buildings, the most ornate buildings, would be department stores. And like for instance, down in the late 19th century, there was a whole district which we call today Ladies Mile. And many of those buildings are still there today, but there are these grand examples of architecture, these places which were designed because they knew women were doing the shopping. And so flash forward to like the mid 19th century, and department stores are kind of now part of the booming area of Midtown Manhattan. But still, like, there's a lot of gender roles that haven't been broken at that time. I mean, that's one of the main stories of Mad Men, is like following this character as she breaks the glass ceiling, so to speak. So the department store can not only, I think, embodies, like, it creates these opportunities to bring in women's stories in certain fashions, but it's also a way, I think, for filmmakers to show off, because those are big sets where they can create the time period very precisely. I'm sure costume lovers, costume designers love those scenes in particular. And also, I think, finally, because a lot of those department stores, even though many of them are closed and many of them transformed, I think a lot of them are still there. Like Carol in particular, I can't remember. They filmed at a well-known department store, but so a lot of those spaces are there. I think they're just very filmic also. So I think for all of those different reasons, and then the department store in the first episode, so we don't go to a department store, but we see a woman who represents her family's department store, Menkins. What's the name?
Yes.
Menkins. Yes. Okay, so Menkins was. She mentions that it shares a wall with Tiffany's. Is the line. But I think it's actually. So then I'll tell you what I thought it was in a second. But I think it's actually supposed to be a stand-in for Bergdorf Goodman, which is actually,
that makes complete sense.
And again, they're so exact. They're like, well, what did they mean by that? So there's a department store sort of catty-cornered from Tiffany's, and it was a Jewish department store, and it moved up to Midtown. And so what I thought it was at first, I was excited to talk about it until I dispelled this, is there was a literal department store right next to Tiffany's called Bonwit Teller. It was right to the south of it. And it was famously torn down. It was a beautiful architecture with protected architecture, famously torn down by a real estate developer named Donald Trump, who was going to build his tower there.
Oh my God. So
he comes in and demolishes it. So I thought it was Bonwit Teller, but I think it is Bergdorf Goodman. But there are so many places that it could be. And again, that story, like that storyline and that character could be one of like 3 or 4 possibilities, which is, I mean, that just shows like a depth of research on their part, where it's like, they don't want it to be exactly something for, I don't know, maybe lawsuit reasons, but like, if it can resemble 2 or 3 things that happened, I mean, and then make it tie into the story in this really compelling way, because it brings in the element of Jewish Americans and what their status was in 1960, which gets kind of revealed like in some very telling conversations in that episode.
I think Mencken specifically represents, because obviously, sexism just permeates the entirety of Mad Men, like from beginning to end. And Mencken, Rachel Mencken, right? She's the first character that we see with any sort of power, and it represents just like a dynamic shift, it seems, with how they're operating and everything. And obviously that is tested a bit with Dawn's eventual love affair with her. That's fair. Which I personally I didn't like as a part of the first season, but
the first season has some like problems. It's not like it's not perfect. We forget them because it's such a brilliant show, but like that was weird.
And we also had the moment of it was just such a good juxtaposition of Peggy only being addressed by her name by a man, by Dawn once, almost the entire episode. Like almost, I don't think even Pete says her name to her.
Nope.
No.
Yeah, it's like some extreme version of the Bechdel test.
Well, it's how we know that Dodd is a good guy with no moral flaws and a perfect compass.
He's removed. He's above everyone else. He doesn't act like everybody else. No, I have a problem. I mean, not to jump to the very end of that episode, but I sort of have a problem with the fact that she and Pete just could have got together.
I know.
Yeah, like that feels weird. Like, doesn't that feel like the one wrong note of that show? Am I crazy? Is that
I think it was the pressure from everyone. I think the entire episode is just her being told, hey, this is what you need to do to improve yourself for the male gaze. And then she finds the one person who is the absolute meanest to her and just caves for that.
Mm-hmm. It's something that we come across a lot in a lot of the pilots that we see, that there's this like unnecessary force of two people have to be like matched by the audience of like, oh, these are the two that you're rooting for. But like, this was very different in that I was rooting for no one to have any sexual chemistry.
Yeah. I was like, no,
whatsoever. No.
I was like, I would like everyone to be celibate for just like 20 minutes. Like for 20 minutes, have like focus on the pressures of living in New York and like being able to provide for your family. And I do have one more question, at least for me, for you, Greg, and that is, we've seen so many depictions of New York. There's such a gigantic history of the city of New York. Is there a story that you think hasn't been told that you'd really like to see expanded upon? That maybe,
or like an era,
an era too, of like, what is that story that you wish someone, maybe they're listening, is like, hey, I wish you would tell this story because there's something there that just hasn't been tapped.
Well, I have two, and I want credit for whoever producer is listening to this, because these are so
trademarking
good.
This podcast now.
Exactly.
So the first one, so right now on the podcast, we're doing, like a few weeks ago, we went over to the Netherlands because it's the 400th anniversary
it's so cool.
of the Dutch. Mm-hmm. So the Dutch settled New York, and they called the original settlement was called New Amsterdam at the tip of Manhattan. And a lot of our names are Dutch, like the Bronx, Staten Island, Brooklyn, those are all like their Dutch names. So I envision, because they were only here for like on the tip of Manhattan for 40 years. And they have one leader in particular named Peter Stuyvesant, who basically is like the last 15 years. So I want a Game of Thrones style show about New Amsterdam.
That's
just
very
about
cool.
Because you're having battles with the English, you're having battles with the native people. That's when enslaved people start coming into so there's all of these different stories, all this mix. The best part is you don't have to be in New York at all to film it, because none of it's around anyway. And so it all has to be kind of designed like on sets. And if they could do that for the Gilded Age, which is the HBO show, they can do it for this. And I just feel like it has a kind of epic Game of Thrones quality to me.
That's so cool.
So that's like one end. The other, interestingly, is to go back to the 1960s, but tell it from the story of basically like a gay rights. So there was a group called the Mattachine Society.
Yeah.
And this starts in the early like 1960s. And in a way, I can see a broad story being told set in the village that incorporates all different kinds of things. Like you would have, like Barbra Streisand, like characters could go into and see Barbra Streisand perform the first time, which was at a place, a small cafe in the West Village in 1964. But have it tell that story, because that's also could be kind of a confined story. It can sort of end in 1971, which is the first Gay Pride Parade. But that's a story about struggles. It also brings in a lot of different people. So those are my two ideas. If I could executive produce something, one of them could be produced more cheaply than the other, I think.
Sure.
There's a lot of vintage clothing stores that sells 1960s flamboyant clothes that we could do. It'd be harder to find those like Dutch soldier uniforms, but we can do anything.
I do like after Mad Men, I think my second favorite New York depiction show is Pose, and they do cross a little bit over into, but it's all like 80s ballroom culture and everything, so it's like a little bit after the Mattachine Society had like more not normalized gay culture, gay rights in the city. But yeah, it was definitely I loved their depiction.
The funny part about that show is that I watched all 3 seasons. I thought it was great. The characterizations were perfect. They did not care where they were filming. There's so many. You're just like, oh, there's a building that was built in 2013 over there. Like they didn't care. They knew that like the action was happening like close up with all the characters. They even filmed the. I live in Brooklyn. They even filmed the scene that was supposed to be the Christopher Street Piers, where like in the 80s, like people would hook up. They filmed that in my neighborhood.
Oh my God.
Like, wait a minute. I think it's where I walk my dog over there, so, but again, people take different approaches. It doesn't have to be, it's great when shows like Mad Men do go that extra mile, but it's not necessary if the stories are good.
Yeah. See, that's what we were saying. Every square inch of New York has historical impact.
So, Greg, an easy breezy one for me. It's canon in the pilot that Don Draper's go-to drink is rye whiskey. We see Rachel Menken order a Mai Tai. And I'd like to know, what is your classic New York City drink order? What's your go-to?
I wish I was more creative, but since the pandemic, we used to have, for those bad months, it was like 7 o'clock Manhattan time. So like we poured some Manhattans. So I'm breaking, I'm breaking I have to break the Manhattans because the Manhattans are showing up in my body in less desirable ways. But I mean, the funny thing is I don't drink. I used to drink a lot of cocktails. Then cocktail culture happened and the price hikes happened. Sure. And so like now it's like, oh, this cocktail's $25. So I tend to drink. And so now I'm more of a Brooklynite and drink a lot of IPAs. We have so many, you can't trip over, you can't go a block without tripping over like a kind of local brewery, which is great. I have to shout out my favorites, Strong Rope and Keg and Lantern, but there's like a million, of just like great brew. You can get better. Like just think of the beer they were drinking on Mad Men.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just the like swill compared to what we have today.
We need Don pitching all of these Brooklyn microbreweries like it's hazy.
Right. I mean, a Mad Men. Well, I mean, that would be. I don't want this to happen because it's painful to bring back things. But like, imagine like those whoever characters existed, because that would have been like 60s. Like some kind of a show where it was a jump forward to like 2000, and somehow Don Draper is still alive, and he's like whatever 85 or something.
He's living in Boca Raton, like he's
more likely it would be Peggy who would be still alive and still like running an advertisement. I mean, that would be kind of funny, but let's not imagine that show. Those usually don't work.
Yeah,
I watched Frasier. Those don't work. Those jump aheads don't work.
Yeah, that was a little hard to watch. It somehow felt more sitcom-y than it was prior.
Yeah, you feel you realize what a construct a sitcom is when we take it and you make it like now we're so used to like kind of modern single camera. Anyway, didn't work.
Absolutely. For me. We did discuss the 2013 created building in Pose, which famously takes place in like I think 1986.
Like the 80s or the 90s. Yeah.
What is I have an answer for this too, but when you're watching a show set in New York, what is a telltale sign that no one from the production team, no one from the location scouting team has ever spent any time there?
Well, I would say anytime I see an alleyway that's supposed to be in New York City, I'm like, no,
we have one.
That's Chicago. That's
Chicago. No, Chicago has brilliant alley. Like, I wish we had more because it would be helpful to like, for
trash.
Emergency vehicles and trash. Like the city unfortunately was not designed except for like some areas of upper Manhattan a little bit, but no. So whenever there's an alleyway, like someone's beat up in an alley, I'm like, that alley is like, I don't know, in Pittsburgh or Chicago. It's not here. Whenever I see a show and characters are like walking side by side, like Sex and the City is like, even though Sex and the City is filmed here, it drove me nuts when it was like 4 people walking down the street talking.
They're always in the middle of the road. They're always in the middle of the road at Sex and the City.
It's one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm walking in New York. If you are blocking the walkway, I have the right to punch you in the back.
I'm on season 5 right now, and they're in
that
the
is
middle
my right.
There's no cars behind them. Carrie's in the middle of the street.
I know the lack of honking in the exterior audio is always funny to me.
Oh I mean, I trust me. I record podcasts in this city. It is a constant refrain, a constant hum of honking, emergency vehicles, even helicopter sounds. No, it's not right there.
This is our plea to New York of please make more alleyways. Like there'd be less trash in the streets, more people could walk along the street. Like, I mean, that'd be great.
The few alleys that are here are like they're so rare that they're enchanting. They're like, oh, this is gorgeous. Like there's beautiful, there's beautiful alleys. We don't have those here. And finally, I would just say that like there aren't enough shows filmed not like they're all everything even now is still filmed in Manhattan, which I kind of feel is weird. I mean, I guess in a way, Girls was a revolutionary show because all of a sudden it centered the filming out in Brooklyn. But that, and I mean, we're still used a lot on like crime shows.
Oh yeah,
we get a lot of Law and Order down in my neighborhood.
One alleyway in Manhattan, the only one that exists, I think, is owned by Dick Wolf now.
I mean, there's like it's the most dangerous alley in the world. It's like constant crimes. They just dress it up with a different sign or a different dumpster. Oh, this is bring in the red dumpster. So now it looks like a different alley.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, thank you so much for coming on with us. Like, I think if there's anything that people should take away from the Bowery Boys, then everyone should like and subscribe to the Bowery Boys. Leave a great review. Listen to all 453 of the episodes. It will be very much worth your time. And, I think what people should take away from it is that they should treat where they live like the Bowery Boys.
I agree, yes.
Yeah, I think you should. I think it's extremely important to understand the history of where your feet are.
Every city has its own, like I wasn't born in New York City. I was born in Springfield, Missouri, and was obsessed with the history when I was there. I mean, like every city... it makes the place you're living so much better if you know just a little bit. You don't have to be a total history geek like me, but like if you know,
read the plaques.
Read the plaques. If you like, why is it so hard to get to my job? Like if you understood a little bit, like why that highway was built and what used to be there and what, but it can also be helpful for the future. Cause it's like, well, these are the mistakes that they made in the past.
Sure.
Like as we think about our future for our children, is there another way to like have our cities being developed in a different way?
Absolutely.
Greg, let me just say thank you so much. And to all of our frequent flyers who tuned in for Greg, any first timers who may have come here for a little part of Bowery Boys crossover, I hope you take away two things from this episode. I hope you appreciate all of the attention to detail in today's pilot as we get ready to dive into it. And just a friendly reminder, there are only 3 podcasts that exist that are canon from today's episode. Bowery Boys in 2007, WTF with Mark Maron in 2010, and then no new podcasts happened until 2022 when TVPL started.
Those 3 dates. Those are the
only 3 podcasts.
Everything else. Plaque. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you. This has been fun. Yeah. I'd love to talk about Mad Men. I think you may have inspired a future Mad Men themed show. I have never actually done a show on Mad Men because it's over, but people want to know. People still watch it, so
Absolutely.
And for those who are tuning in, where can everyone find you, Greg?
So all of your, most of your methods, we're not very well represented on YouTube yet, but all of your other podcast feeds, your Apples, your Spotify's, your Overcast, you can find Bowery Boys, and then Bowery Boys History is the website.com, and I am on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, probably some others. Those are the 3 most active ones. So find me there. In particular, because we're in the middle of this Dutch miniseries, we've got all these captivating photographs of, just in case you don't get to go anywhere for vacation this year, just you can thumb through my pictures of Leiden and Amsterdam and all those fun places. So
yeah, that series has been super cool to listen to.
Thank you. 2 more exciting episodes, and then we're done. And then we're back to New York. So, but thank you all for having me on.
Well, thanks again so much to Greg. I don't know about you boys, but I learned a hell of a load that I wasn't expecting going into this recording.
It was crazy to see his face because I have only been hearing him in my AirPods on the subway for such a long time. It was like looking at an angel for the first time.
Well, for those who are sticking around, maybe you just came to listen to Greg talk unfiltered about his love of New York and Mad Men.
Boy, he swears a lot.
Yeah. Max, why don't you tell folks who are here for the first time or maybe here for the 100th plus time what we're all about?
Hello, and welcome back to TV Pilot's License, the podcast where we break down and analyze the pilot episodes of some of TV's most famous, or in some cases, infamous shows. We learn a little more about how these shows came to be and were originally made, if they're effective pilot episodes and making us want to watch more, and if we think they could be made today. Go back and stream our old episodes from wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on YouTube and TikTok to see our smiling faces. And if it is your first time flying with us, then welcome aboard.
And rather than Rich's question of the week, we've had a lot of questions, and we asked Greg. We asked Greg a ton of questions, Rich included. So we're gonna dive right into Mad Men, and I'm not gonna lie. After hearing Greg have such amazing answers to some of our questions and such beautiful descriptions about New York, this synopsis leaves us some little bit of something that you want a little bit more, because it's a drama about one of New York's most prestigious ad agencies at the beginning of the 1960s. That's our synopsis about Mad Men, which is just so bare bones. And Max, I'm curious, what went into making this show?
So today we are talking about the pilot of Mad Men titled Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which originally aired on July 19th, 2007 on AMC. And we are talking about the show's creator of Matthew Weiner a little bit more. Weiner receives his MFA from USC and spends years trying to find a way in as a TV writer in Los Angeles, finally getting staffed in 1996 on Fox's Party Girl, a short-lived 6-episode sitcom. He spends the late 90s and early 2000s bouncing around from sitcom to sitcom, taking part in writers' rooms for shows like Andy Richter Controls the Universe and Becker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not what you expect. Not what you expect. Beginning in 1999, while employed at Becker, Weiner begins work on a very different type of pilot, the first drafts of what would go on to become Mad Men. Inspired by American literature of the 1950s and 60s, Weiner begins his drama on Madison Avenue advertising, sending the script around town, including to one David Chase, the creator and showrunner of The Sopranos. Chase staffs Weiner on The Sopranos, where he'll spend 4 years and earned 2 Emmy nominations for penned episodes. Weiner tries to sell his Mad Men pilot to HBO with the hopes of his mentor Chase executive producing, but Chase declined to be a part of the package. Weiner claims he could never even get a proper meeting with the network, with FX and Showtime passing as well. HBO CEO Richard Plepler later called passing on Mad Men his biggest regret and the decision as inexcusable. Sales efforts on this show were actually shelved for several years until 2005, when a cable network known for broadcasting old movies decides to begin inquiring into original programming. AMC's then VP of programming called his own network a lesser TCM with a collection of shit-ass movies.
Woo!
Even Weiner's own team cautioned him about partnering with the network, but a commitment of $3.3 million to shoot the pilot spoke volumes. Money that AMC fronted themselves, unable to secure any additional backing while pitching the show to advertisers and producers.
That's awesome.
Weiner and AMC sought for unknown actors, with Weiner saying the lack of celebrity early on contributed to the success of The Sopranos and wanted to follow in David Chase's lead. The pilot filmed in April of 2006 while The Sopranos' final season was on hiatus. The show didn't have money to build sets, so empty floors of office buildings were used, and the episode was filmed in only 10 days. In August of that year, it was announced the show would be picked up for a full season order by AMC, with production shifting to Los Angeles.
Oh, man. Awesome. That's cool. That also, I don't know, that it just feels, I just can't believe how well AMC was picking shows back then.
Yeah.
I mean, Breaking Bad was a little bit after.
It's like a year later.
Was a little after that. Yeah, I mean, what was the name of their exec or their chairman? I assume that's the person who was greenlighting these shows.
Oh, Mr. Stable of shit ass movies.
I mean, they're extreme kudos to their development department, because oh my god, the batting average of AMC is insane.
So let's dive into the show a little bit more, and this is one of those rare shows where we get the original opening title sequence and opening of the show right away with this iconic, there's a lot of iconic stuff about this opening, right? We get the beautiful animated sequence of a mix of 2D and 3D of that falling man through the sky with just that great music behind it where I'm instantly like, yep, I'm in, like, let's go, we're setting
like electro swing or something, right?
What's fascinating about it, so the song's called A Beautiful Mind by RJD2, like an electro DJ group, and it's like you don't need period accurate music, you just need things that invoke a feeling. And I think it's interesting because, like, Mad Men, as Greg said, it is so detail oriented, it is so down to the minutia accurate in what it tries to convey, except for this one thing, which is just trying to create an overall ambiance, a feeling of a time. We're using 2000s electro swing to convey a period of, 50 plus years prior.
So our show opens on this iconic scene of watching Don Draper, write notes in a bar, but then having this conversation that sets us up with the idea of, like, this man thinks and only thinks in advertising. I do have to mention, we get the description of what a madman is, right? Of what madmen are, of these men that work on Madison Avenue within the advertising world. And it's such a good scene. It does so many nice little points of this man that is waiting and doing table work for Don. It happens to be black and not used to having conversation with the patrons automatically. And it's, yes, this is the period. It is accurate of the idea of, like, there's a stigma and Don does not give a shit.
You get so much in the first minute of this show establishing the rules of the world at this point. It is the racism, the sexism, and the sexism somehow trumps the racism. I don't know how that's possible. But, like, even the people who are victimized by the racism are have, like, sexist tendencies. And just, like, also, what would be a pretty long-standing plot device for the show is the changing health landscape of cigarettes. And that's everything in that first minute establishes so much already that you can already, like, put yourself in that mindset. You already know what the universe is going to be like. And I'll be honest, like, this whole show makes me think about, like, my grandparents' generation a lot, because I'm like, oh God, I really hope my grandfather wasn't, like, talking like this, or, like, because it's crazy to watch. And I think one of the reasons that this show is so popular right from the jump is it's the kind of shocking realization that this is what a liberal city was like in the 50s.
Max, I specifically have a question just for you,
yeah,
actually, which is, we sort of open with Don having this one-person focus group of why don't you smoke Lucky Strike cigarettes? And Rich and I both have a history of being in advertising. And I'm curious, as Rich shows
for our viewers at home on the YouTube feed, Rich has a history of smoking Lucky Strikes.
I'm also a victim of advertising.
So I'm curious about what your thoughts are on this conversation with Sam and seeing a little glimpse, or the start of a glimpse, of a man who prides themselves of being in the minds of consumers and being an advertiser.
I think it's such a fascinating choice by Weiner to spend so much time in the first couple of pages not talking about the people specifically, but dedicating it to such specificity in, why do you smoke that cigarette? Tell me about what that represents for you. Tell me how, like, you and that brand are connected. What's your history there? And there's such an attention to detail in those lines that, and Mad Men does this a lot, where we learn things about people and, like, what kind of people they are, not through what they say about themselves or even what other people say about them, but we learn it about how we talk around things, or just how we talk about things. We learn it through visual cues, through lighting cues. This is a show that really manages to convey a lot. While it has some heavy-handed pilot lines that you need to sell a show, it also manages to have these just, like, fun little, like, dances and, like, diatribes that go in interesting directions. This same scene also has the line that sparked a revolution in bars around the country when Don just says, "Do this again, old-fashioned, please." And in that moment, bars were uprooted. It's like the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where they're all going after,
the obelisk.
They're all going after the obelisk. It's like all of a sudden, all of all the men in bars said, I don't want Bud Lights, I want old fashions, and I'm going to change my drink order.
It's so funny. I remember making old fashions in our frat house because of this show. Yeah. And then when I told my dad I was making them, I was like, oh, that's what your grandma used to drink.
I am curious because we asked Greg what his drink of choice would be. What would your drinks of choice be if you were Don Draper in this moment?
Oh, I'm going another pack of Lucky Strikes. Today's newspaper, a plate of oysters Rockefeller, and then leave the bottle of rye at the table.
Oh my god!
This show in general has just so many iconic cocktail moments. We get the old fashioned. We get the boardroom pitcher of Bloody Marys for an AM meeting.
Amazing.
I want to dedicate so much time to the power of ordering a Mai Tai in a non-tiki setting. That's one of the best moves I've ever seen, one I want to adapt. But yeah, it's like we use these things to say so much about our world. It's a delightful way to do character development.
Max getting dragged out of Dodger Stadium for ordering a Singapore sling.
And I am ordering a Shirley Temple. So let's talk a little bit about what happens next, because this show has something very unique to it in that it's very sexy in ways that are appealing and very unappealing at the same time. Okay. Like there is a lot of we have this opening sex scene where Don goes and meets with what I can only describe as his muse and his mistress, right? This woman who is within the creative space, just like Don, who is dark, mysterious, free, wild. But she obviously inspires him and is someone that he trusts as a confidant within the space as well.
Say Rosemary DeWitt, who plays Midge Daniels, might be one of the biggest names in this pilot at this point. She has a leading role in Rachel Getting Married across from Anne Hathaway this same year. And it's just I don't know. It's beautiful, and kind of going back to them not having room for set budgeting. There's just such beautiful natural light when we see the two of them together in the morning. It's there's actual daybreak light and shadow, and it's soft. There's so much amazing use of soft light in this show that I really love.
Rich, what were you thinking?
So I really loved the way that you described her as a muse, Jeff, because I hadn't thought about that, and it also really plays into my disillusionment with advertising in the sense that we've taken all these people who probably would be artists in their own right and made them sell sausage links and
Grandmother's Day in this instance,
and Hondas and Grandmother's Day, and it's just so funny to think about a Picasso muse, but for selling cigarettes and in a magazine.
We get the cigarette muse, and we also get an example of a heavy-handed line really working well, because it's page 3 or 4 on this script, and we hear Midge say, "Is this the part where I say Don Draper is the world's greatest ad man?" Yep. I'm boom, we just sold the character. There we go.
I'm fucking in. I'm I'm absolutely
now we know who he is. Don Draper, world's greatest freaking ad man.
So
it's so funny that they have this buildup of his skills, and then there's no delivering on his skills at all until the last 4 pages of the script.
So I think this show does a very good job of mixing, let's drive the plot forward, while also let's remind you about what this show is about at the same time, and what period this show is in. Because as soon as we have this awesome, this very great plot, character development driving sex scene that we do have, we also get to meet Peggy on her first day. Why is this day different than every other day? There's a couple
Peggy's
of reasons.
First day, baby.
It is Peggy's first day, and we love a first day of work as driving a plot forward and seeing this agency through her eyes as a woman who is being, there are misogynistic comments that are being driven towards her by the men of this firm, and even from the women of this firm in many instances. And I think Elisabeth Moss does such a great job of being this neophyte within this space of she's almost like a newborn. She has no idea what she is doing other than what she was taught in secretary school.
Yeah, I think what this establishes now, watching this with the lens of having seen every episode of this show, is that Peggy is the core of this show. It is Don Draper's story. Peggy is the core of the show, front to back. There is no changing that. It is first day, back through, with her like ascendance to out of like the secretarial pool and everything. It is 100%. She's the pillar that the tower is built around.
What I dig about these welcoming to work scenes is how they're done so simultaneously, and the way we cut back and forth between the men and the women. And we kind of see these parallel stories of what the workplace looks like based on, who you are and how you were born. And with the guys too, we get, the boys club attitude. And I think it's an interesting choice how many of them are kind of just nameless, same characters. And obviously, a lot of them go on to have awesome arcs, but it's like we don't really establish who like Harry, Ken, Paul, those guys who have big arcs are in the beginning. They're just Pete's boys. They're just Pete Campbell's guys who hang out with him. They're his, same ex-frat boy, young hotshot advertising guys. Whereas the women, we spend a lot of time specifically saying Peggy and Joan. We hit their names. We give them more one-on-one time. We establish who they are. And the guys in this case are just kind of all one big blob of talking suits.
Yeah. And I mentioned this a little bit in our conversation with Greg too. It's like, if you pay attention to how everyone's referring to Joan and Peggy, Peggy only gets addressed by first name by Don once the entire episode, and that's the only man who acknowledges her with a name the entire time.
So in addition to that, and like putting the audience in the perspective of this is where women were at during this period, we also get this great scene. We get this very interesting scene of like seeing Don go into the office for the first time, right? He has stayed in Manhattan overnight. At this point, the audience is not let in on the big reveal at the end of the pilot. We're changing shirts. This
desk drawer full of matching folded white Oxfords is so funny.
Yeah, it felt like on The Simpsons, where they, or like any cartoon where they open their closet and it's all the same unit, it's all the same outfit because the animators don't want to draw new clothes.
But having Roger Sterling come in and be like, "Do we have any Jews?" Also, immediately, did my butthole quench up? Yes.
Sure.
But also, at the same time, it helps us put ourselves in perspective of what was this time period like. Yes, that should feel uncomfortable because hopefully you've progressed in your reptile brain of, people's
Imagine
religion.
Selling the Roger Sterling audition to like the bevy of actors going into it. It's like, all right, here's the deal. It's a thankless part in this pilot. You're in 2 scenes, and the first time we meet you, you have to ask if we've hired any Jews. You've got 9 lines in this episode, and 3 of them are vaguely anti-Semitic.
and they do like I think this establishes the first like, oh, this is like half a comedy moment too, because this is very much a Don's retort of like, not on my watch. It's like, have we hired any Jews? Not on my watch. Like, as like very clearly a tongue-in-cheek joke. I think the moments of comedy in this show really sell it for me. I really like, super captivating.
And it doesn't just stop there, right? With like that uncomfortable idea of like, oh, do we have a Jew? Because we're going to bring in a Jewish client, and fingers crossed they're going to feel more comfortable in the room. And
a stolen plot from Becker, by the way.
I'd be lying if I said in my advertising career I have not had that happen to me of like, oh, you like this, you should come into this meeting. Not based off of my religion, but so be it. But then we also get the perspective of seeing Salvatore Romano walk in, a very clearly closeted man.
Whoa! He's an Italian ladies' man. I don't know what you're talking about, Jeff.
Very clearly, like I love the performance that Brian Batt did for Salvatore is one of my favorites of this entire pilot, because it has to be, you have to tread that line so damn carefully of being like, all right, so we assume a closeted man in the 1960s who also is one
Jeff,
of our
he's
creatives.
Going out with the boys to the bachelor party. He's at the burlesque bar. He's drinking at work. What are you talking about?
His neighbor's doing him a favor by posing for the smoking advertisement that Don asked, why didn't you have a woman?
I just absolutely love the way Sal is written in this whole show. And so we get one woman who has like a little bit of power coming into the scene of Greta, who's their psychologist, their hired psychologist. And when she's giving him their psychological report about this, and talking about like the death wish aspect of like smoking cigarettes or like buying a fast car or something like that, Sal bluntly says, so you're saying people are living one way and secretly thinking the opposite? That's ridiculous. I'm like, that is a crazy line to throw in the script. I love that line so much. It is so like, it's such a Gene Wilder ass like line to deliver. It is so good.
So this pilot introduces us. There are a lot of characters that we meet throughout this entire pilot.
Oh, yeah.
I think one of the characters that the audience is meant to instantaneously not like out of this boys club of people is Pete Campbell, who is getting married on Sunday. It's his bachelor party that everyone is asked to attend. And he is the creepiest, privileged man I have seen in a decent amount of time on this podcast.
We get the best like one-liner for Pete, and it's in that first meeting with him when Don just says, you have to forgive Pete Campbell, he left his manners at the fraternity house, and it's like, boom, I know everything I need to know right then and there. It's so sharp, it's so well done to establish Pete's persona.
So after that, we get our meeting with Rachel, our catastrophic meeting with Rachel Menken, right? Of Don introducing himself to the wrong person. Don
introducing himself to David Cohen from the art department.
Yeah. Don treating her, as a person lesser than just because she's a woman, which is very clear. But I love the character of Rachel Menken for not backing down, for being this authority figure, for being someone who really captured the room and the scene. And like credit to the director and the writers of this, because there is a world where I'm like, oh, Don Draper and Roger Sterling are stealing the show. And I'm like, no, I'm only paying attention to Rachel's character, her wants, her needs, and how she is being wronged by everyone in this scene.
I was a little distracted by the mid-morning shrimp cocktail and pictures of Bloody Marys, but I understand what you're saying, Jeff.
Very not kosher. Whoever was picking the thing.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Oh my God. Yeah, they brought a shellfish to the meeting with the Jewish department store owner.
That was the only thing I was thinking, is I was like,
that's so funny.
You brought a non-kosher meal to like try and win this meeting with who you clearly are like, that it says two things, right? One, disrespectful to the Jewish culture. Two, you know so little about the Jewish culture that you're like, you know what Jews love? Shellfish. We couldn't get lobster, but we could get some shrimp.
I feel like this is like a second choice. Like they redid this scene because I have a feeling that their first inclination in the script was to write that they brought in bagels for the
that would have been so
for the
funny.
meeting. But like also I think it would have been too ham-fisted. I think having the shellfish at this meeting was like, oh, here's a joke just for the Jews.
Well, it wouldn't have been kosher if it was ham-fisted either, Rich.
God damn it.
I want to talk a little bit about Peggy and like individualize her storyline a little bit, because I think that one of the things that we see in this pilot is really quick character development of Peggy as a whole. From this is her first day, she's being quiet, and she has all of these influential figures, mostly Joan, who are trying to get Peggy to, one, ensure she's successful, but two, make sure she doesn't fuck everything up for everyone else. And we get this pivotal doctor scene where Peggy is trying to get contraceptive pills. And this
the fact that she has 2 hours of this job under her belt and they've already sent her to the OBGYN is crazy.
To know that that is the priority of this agency is also something super interesting. And Max, I guess when you're seeing this performance by Elisabeth Moss, how this is written, what's going through your mind for Peggy and for, being put in this scene where this seems to not be a sexually promiscuous woman who's being forced down that lane.
There's a lot of things that happen around Peggy. Like, she's a character who in this pilot is sort of caught in a whirlwind. Things happen around her that force her hand. It's clear that, for a lot of it, I'd say for the first 40 some odd minutes, they're not choices that she's making. They're choices being made for her. And that makes her decision at the very end that we'll get to all the more powerful. There's 2 scenes really close together that do such an interesting job of establishing her status on the show, and her relationships. First is her OB scene. The OB is smoking while he's doing the exam, which is just bonkers and unhygienic. But you see, like, in her eyes as she turns and stares off to the calendar, that she's just having things happen to her. She's caught in this whirlwind. We get a quick glimpse of the calendar saying March of 1960, a very subtle way of sneaking in the time and date of the pilot in there. A nice, props choice there. The Peggy moment that I think establishes so much about this show, though, is just before Don's taking a cat nap on the couch in his office, and as he is awoken by Peggy, we see her framed in the bottom third of the screen.
Yep.
In the brightest, boldest yellow sweater with just pale, soft light behind her. So from a camera perspective, we're putting her in a really bold color against a really soft background, establishing her importance. We're putting her in that lower third to really catch your eye on that natural horizon. And then we're also having her direct Don, or direct herself to Don from above him. And that's that first conversation between the two of them. And everything in that, from the DP choice to the wardrobe choice to Alan Taylor, who directed this pilot, to Matthew Weiner, it screams to you as an audience member, this is important. And it doesn't have to say that it's important. And the conversation is frankly not important. It's small talk, but everything that they do aesthetically just tells you, you need to be listening to this as an audience. And that is such a beautiful shot. And it's so many technical elements coming together in an astounding way. In a mere matter of 3 seconds, we tell you that this relationship right here is one of the most important things that's going to happen if you continue to follow this show.
Max, I viewed that moment, and I wrote that moment down in my notes too. It was it's extremely astute, observation on your part. Do you feel that the way it felt for me was that it was kind of like a angelic or savior type moment of oh, this person is going to save Don Draper from himself?
Oh,
did you feel that?
If you really want to start getting into classical art and art history, we can absolutely talk about bright yellow and the sun and the soft light and church glass and things like that. We can 100% talk about that, especially because you hear the soft falling of bombs when Don closes his eyes there. It's presumed it's a war flashback there. We've already seen him flash a Purple Heart. So yeah, you could absolutely, I think it's a very astute observation, Rich, that we are establishing Peggy as someone who has to save Don in some way down the line. I love that idea from you.
Yeah.
So there's a very iconic scene in this pilot that I have seen so many times in the history of my career in advertising, in my time in school when I was, taking telecom classes and show writing classes and all of that. And it's Don's meeting with Lucky Strike of how are we going to help Lucky Strike and I love this scene for multiple reasons. One, does a great job of driving the plot forward. Two, shows why we think Don Draper is this brilliant man within advertising. But three, it does such a good job of putting you into the place of what was advertising in the 1960s. It wasn't driven by metrics. It wasn't driven by these focus and analytics-based group decisions. It was driven by men like Don Draper doing something so simple, breaking down a process and turning it into Lucky Strike toasted, right? And, like, I love that scene so much.
And contextually, like, to this point, Don Draper has been stressing himself out and trying to find every means of creativity that he knows that's in his arsenal, that's in his quiver right now to get to this point, and realizes he's still going to have to wing it at this meeting. It's kind of the only moment you get to see Don Draper be so good at his job, because up until that point, it's been, he's asking bartenders, he's asking servers, he's throwing out the advice of their researcher. He's like, and then you also get to see in this meeting too, Jeff, the power struggle of Pete Campbell's, like, his ladder climbing, or his corporate ladder climbing, like, need, where while Don is clearly driven by ego, Pete is very driven by status and hoping people see him as powerful. And it's so interesting to watch that happen. And, in that meeting, Pete goes against, they use this quite a lot in this show as a whole, but Pete goes against, or he goes rogue in the meeting and decides to bring his own idea to the table, which is like taking the advice of the researcher. Then, as Lucky Strike was nearly walking out, Don basically jumps up to save the day. Yeah. And it just creates that like peak drama moment.
We get that epiphany from Don. And what I love that we do here is we get this line of, like, advertising is based on one thing. And we get this thesis on advertising and America. And it's like the show tells you here, this is why we're telling this story through this lens. Like, this is not necessarily a show about advertising. It's about people and relationships and psyche, but we're doing it through this lens. And here is the speech to tell you why we're choosing to do that. And I love that we get that in there. And I love that also it's framed so close on Don. And in today's world, we just talk about, peak TV, prestige TV. There's so many things that try to film like movies where they're framed really far back and you want to see the whole character. You want to see gesticulation. I think about Succession a lot with that. And Mad Men does the opposite. It frames it so tight on Don from, like, the middle of his chest to the top of his head. And he's just right up there in your face and he's speaking directly to you. And it is so TV. And I just love that feeling. I love when it feels like TV. And the Peggy scene I talked about gives you that vibe. And this Dodge shot gives you that vibe. It just feels like it's doing the best work for the small screen. And it's so successful in that to me.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that these storylines in this pilot come to a close, because this pilot sets up a lot of different stories for us, and it does such a great job of ending each. And I want to start off with how we see Peter and Peggy's storylines end in this pilot. Peter goes on his bachelor party and is the creepiest version
he's striking out
of a person that I've ever seen. But I love how that influences said person's decision making to then say, I'm going to try to strike out one more time because it tells me everything I need to know about that character.
It's such desperation for being liked. It's doing anything to climb the ladder when Don is flat out said to your face, you are unlikable. And that is driving Pete's motivation through everything he does, is being told that he is not liked.
I think this is actually, and 100% the likability aspect plays heavily into this, but I think it's the power. I think it's the fact that he tells his fiance on the phone, I'm giving up my life for you. He's like doing this like power struggle thing and like kind of corporate espionage thing with Don. But like Peggy now is like represents the only person he could potentially have a little bit of leverage over. And it's only because she's brand new. And like the fact that he's like showing up at her apartment, no idea how he got her address, by the way. That's completely insane.
It's someone without power trying so desperately to obtain power by any means necessary.
And it shows the difference between Peter and Don, right? Because when Peggy makes a move, even though it's a very light one of holding Don's hand, and he says, you're not here to be my girlfriend. And seeing her being taken aback after being taught by everyone around her that she is not there for her brain. She is there as a body, and she is there as being something pretty to look at and make Don's life as little of an inconvenience as possible. I love that line of, you are a mix of a waitress and a therapist, right? When Joan said that, because then at the end of this pilot, Peggy takes the role she's been told she needs to take as someone that is there to be a body for Peter. And was I upset with Peggy as a person watching and imagining that TV was real? Yes. Was
She's
I
a victim of circumstance.
Was this great writing? Yes. Also, I was just like, yep, that is the best way of ending these two characters, because, at least for the pilot, because now I want to see what the fuck happens the next day.
Yeah, Peggy is definitely dealing with like an unworthiness aspect to this entire episode of just like, I don't deserve to be here. I don't know. Like, I think it gets revealed later on that she's like not getting asked out very much and like not dating a whole lot or anything like that. And it just becomes like all right, well, I might as well take this. This is like, I know this person's literally about to get married, and the only reason that secretaries hook up with their bosses or whatever is to potentially get out of the workforce. And yeah, it's just, I definitely feel for Peggy a lot in this episode. She is put through the fucking ringer.
So from there, let's talk a little bit about how Don's story ends, because I think it's such an interesting end. We're not just going to have our one interaction with Rachel Mencken. We have our second interaction with Rachel at a bar after work, where Don is trying to not only apologize, but win her business. I will, give a little clue into our personal lives. I did text Max and Rich because I saw a poo-poo platter in this scene and I got very excited. You know what? If I can order a poo-poo platter at a restaurant, I'm doing it 9 times out of 10.
The post-World War II, like, GIs returning home from the Pacific obsession with, like, South Pacific culture and like the tiki movement. They are in the stuffiest white tablecloth Manhattan restaurant.
Right.
There's a poo-poo platter and Rachel Mencken orders a Mai Tai. And you need some real chutzpah to order a cocktail like that in a restaurant with those kind of tablecloths. It is canon. Jews love Mai Tais. We love nothing more than having a tropical drink on a beach. It's part of our culture. It's our history. It dates back thousands of years. And I'm glad to see it represented in this show.
I love what
Matzah and Mai Tai is the Jewish story.
Oh my god! I love what Rachel says though about the idea of the difference of women and men in this generation, right? And in this world of setting up the idea of she can be a powerful woman. She doesn't think she needs to be married. Instead, she wants to run her family's business. And it is such a interesting thing to see. And Rich, you mentioned it. It's a little bit outside of the pilot, but instantly after that line, I said to myself, well, they're going to hook up now, because Don is very much attracted to women who challenge his assertion of power and challenge the idea that he is, this god amongst boys of his brilliance. And this is a woman who is going to make him better, who's going to make him a better advertiser, but also isn't going to take the average idea. She needs the best. And that I love how they wrote this character. I think it's such a critical part of this pilot.
I think this also establishes this particular scene in general, where Don is basically having like an apology dinner for Rachel, that for no one at Sterling Cooper does work end as you leave the office. At no point are they like, except for like the bachelor party in that particular scene, the work just permeates their social life so much. And I have another comment about where the rest of this pilot is going, but it does, like, it. You can see how important it is for him to have these creative ideas, for him to be the best advertiser in New York, but also like you can tell immediately it's going to catastrophically affect his like personal life. There is no divide.
So let's talk about the final scene, the big reveal. I think this is such a great way to end this pilot. right? We see life isn't all that we've been told. There's more. There is this life in the suburbs where Don seemingly has the perfect family. He has a wife and 2 children. And there's one detail that I absolutely love about this. And the wife in this pilot being played by January Jones, right, is the actress. And I love that this is the first time we've seen a blonde woman in this pilot.
Really?
I believe this is like the first or second that Don is speaking to specifically.
Ah, okay.
Because otherwise, every woman that he spoke to in this pilot, every woman that he's had sexual chemistry with in this pilot has been someone who's brunette, someone who looks nothing like January Jones, someone who has power. And
as soon as he gets to Ossining, it's Barbie and Ken.
This is the idea of someone desiring what they don't have and maybe desiring and not knowing what their real life should be.
Can I give a really quick January Jones, Betty Draper fun fact?
Yeah.
Yes.
So January Jones originally auditioned for Peggy Olson.
Wow.
And
that would have changed the character
basically
completely.
Matthew Weiner
Very
had this
different
idea
show.
of like, listen, I don't think you're right for this one, but I have this idea for another character, for a wife character, but like I don't have her in the pilot yet, but like I think this could be something. And he essentially wrote audition lines for January Jones on the spot to create like a tag scene for her to introduce his characters. He's like, I have this vision of you playing the wife, but I haven't written the wife yet. And he just came up with an audition on the spot for her, and she got the part.
So that is this pilot, though. We end with, Don looking upon his children, his wife looking upon him, and we zoom out from the home that they share.
And you get Don's eyes looking out. They're unfocused. They're looking out at some other horizon. We get this real mid-century Norman Rockwell frame. We get the ending credits of On the Street Where You Live from My Fair Lady. It's just this beautiful encapsulation of desire in whatever form that takes in mid-century America.
It's the changing American dream from the baby boom aspect. It's
longing.
Yeah, it's the, I have seen what is different in the city and I no longer want what was sold to me. And it makes me feel like how I feel about the TV show Severance, and that there is a nearly black and white difference between his home life and work life. It is crazy how different.
So I'm curious from you two, what are some of your favorite parts about this pilot? What were things that you loved about this pilot that maybe we did not discuss?
You guys might have to kick this off?
Yeah, go for it,
Max.
So this pilot is 49 minutes. Like before the ad breaks, it's 49 minutes of screen time. And we resolve our conflict of the Lucky Strike pitch about 2/3 of the way through this episode. And what I love is that even though we wrap up the conflict, we wrap up the problem, Don solves it, we have so much time and we keep pushing. We hit the natural endpoint of what the plot should be, and we keep diving deeper. We use that to then have the Don and Rachel scene where we get all this like emotional establishment, and we keep pushing. We get Pete at his bachelor party, and then Pete knocking at Peggy's door drunk, and we keep pushing to establish character. We have Don asleep on the train to Ossining and going home and seeing the reveal of the wife and the child, and we keep pushing. So many shows could have said, Don solved the problem, he saved the day, he's a hero, and we end it with him being good at his job, him scolding Pete for stealing the research, and Peggy saying, wow, you're so amazing. And that could have been it. And that would have been a fine pilot. But Mad Men dares to just keep diving deeper. And it uses that last like 15 minutes or so to blow open its world, to establish all of these threads. And it's such a bold choice.
Yeah.
And it pays off incredibly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They do just such a good job of making you like anxiously wait for the next episode. Like you cannot they did they did like a kind of like throwaway reveal of his purple heart. There's like they could have easily left Pete Campbell's story at the bachelor party. He's like, oh, he's striking out. People think he's weird. That's it. That's the end of it. It's like, nope, we're going to make it more complex than The Office. We're going to change up these office politics. I personally loved, and Max, you mentioned it was like, it's shot like TV. I think what makes Mad Men so great is that it's shot like a movie. Yeah. I think the close-up shots, I think the slow fade-outs, I think there is so much said in these like dialogue free shots that they have. There's like this one like I almost paused the TV at this one shot of Pete Campbell like just turning away from the camera when he gets rejected at the at his bachelor party. There's so much said in these small scenes with no dialogue. I also very much love the like kind of public nature of their failures. And I think that's going to be that's definitely like a thread throughout the show of just like, they're taking big swings all the time. They're going to fuck up, but because it is such a chaotic environment, it's just like, it adds to comedy. It adds to like the drama of it. It adds to like a deeper understanding of each character's lore.
Isn't it funny though, Rich, to think that like in 2007, you see this as being so cinematic and so film-like, and then 17 years later, you go back and see it, you're like, oh man, this feels like TV again.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. It did feel like, I think, in addition to having like a terrific script and like being very captivating, I thought it was like, oh, this is cinema for home. This is like watching it for the, when it first came on, it was definitely like it's eye candy too. It's 100% eye candy.
So as far as things that I loved, there was a scene that I know we didn't mention talking about the summary of this plot, but that phone operator scene was a
Kristen Schaal
Kristen Schaal and Flo were chilling out in that scene. And like, I love that scene because it was a little bit of necessary comedy in that scene. It was a little burst of like, oh, here's something funny for you. Like, go enjoy that. But I think that one of the things that I love about this pilot is how meticulously it was crafted, from the music to the costume to the shooting. Like, everything was done as an A+, right? Mm-hmm. And like, this show came out about a year before the premiere of Breaking Bad. And like, if I could have bought stock in AMC at that point and been like, oh, they're going to go on a heater for like 8 years. Like, I absolutely would have. Let's quickly talk about some wait a minute moments. What were things that caused you pause? I mean, we could just say Pete Campbell is just a gigantic wait a minute moment in this pilot. But I'm curious from you two, were there any things that really stood out to you?
You know how we joke about times in episodes on this show where we're like, oh, they hadn't cast that part yet, clearly? When Pete pulls out a photo of his fiancée,
it's not
Trudy,
Alison Brie.
It's not Alison Brie. It's just some random stand-in actress in the photo of Trudy Campbell.
That's so funny. I really love that part. I mean, there's a lot of lines that I wrote down there. I was like, oh my God, I forgot how insane the dialogue is in this, or just like the sexism and like the internalized sexism or the internalized misogyny going on. But the line of the OBGYN saying, I will take you off this medicine if you abuse it, was just like, oh God. And, we're all partnered people. Like, we all have like plenty of women in our lives that were like mistreated at doctors' offices or not believed, or like, there's like the misogyny of like just that dynamic of doctor and woman patient. And it was just like, it just made me feel like sick.
And I'll finish this off with like, one of the things, I actually don't have that many wait a minute moments, because I think that one of the things that the show does such a good job of is staying within the period and putting you in that mindset of, this is how awful it was. Like, these are the fucking things that were going on. And Max, my wait a minute moment is actually one of the things that brought me joy. Is I literally was like, that's not a good poo-poo platter. I can tell you right now. I can tell you that's the worst fucking poo-poo platter you're gonna get in New York.
Spring roll aficionado Jeff Kervis, everyone.
And I was just like, why are there flames? You don't need flames. You know?
No, you got a poo-poo platter has skewers. Exactly. There's skewers, Jeff.
Yeah, no, so that's my wait a minute moment. That thing was dry as shit from the extra flame, from extra flames.
For folks at home, find us on any social media platform. Send us pictures of your poo-poo platters. Tag TV Pilots License.
No. It's the PU platters.
Tag TV Pilots License in any photos of tiki drinks you get. Tag us in your poo-poo platters.
Oh my god. Well, gentlemen, we do have one more question. It is an in-flight question. And that is, it's actually, I'm enjoying this one. And it says, embrace your inner capitalists. What is your favorite advertisement that you have fond recollections of? And I'm going to start off and I'm going to give you all two. The advertisement that I watched that actually inspired me to get into advertising was a Coke Zero ad that came out, and it starts off, it was when Coke Zero was first introduced, and they actually had Queen's I Want to Break Free in the background of the ad with just like different people, and it was very flowery, bright, and it premiered before a movie. I forget what movie it was, but in that moment I was like, that's really cool. I want to give people that feeling when they see something that I've made. The other one is one of my favorite worst ads, and it's a Folgers ad that everyone knows.
Oh no!
Where,
Boy, we're covering a lot in this podcast.
Yeah, where a brother comes home to surprise his sister, and he puts a bow on her, and the rest is history. But Max, I'm curious, what is your favorite advertisement?
2 words for you boys. And twins.
Oh my god!
No, I'm kidding. I think that the ads that I recall the most as just having such like a fondness for were the John Hodgman and Justin Long Mac and PC spots, because it felt like they were so like indicative of the beginning of this like improv age, and it just, I don't know, I liked seeing the characterization and humanization of computers, and it just like felt like such a fun comedic way to sell that product.
Well, both of those are absolutely terrific ones, and I have 4 words for you. Terry Tate, office linebacker.
Oh,
the way that ad like controlled my family's sense of humor for about a month, because that was a Super Bowl ad, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
everyone saw that ad. Terry Tate, office linebacker, was one of the funniest, just like so succinct, so stupid. I don't even remember what it was selling. I assume it was like Staples or Office Max or something like that. So clearly it wasn't an effective ad.
So what if I told you, Rich and Max, that
we have Terry Tate coming on next week?
I have met Lester Spite, aka Terry Tate, multiple times in my childhood.
That's so
multiple times, because it was an ad for Reebok, and based off of some of my dad's old work, I got to meet Terry Tate at a few different events.
So funny.
Yeah, the dude, he literally tackled someone at a golf charity tournament, and it was like one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. The guy is a hoot as a whole. Well, gentlemen, thanks you so much. And thanks for that in-flight question. We'll make sure to share how to submit those at the end of the podcast. Let's quickly talk about the history of the show. 7 seasons, 92 episodes, all of which are on AMC. If you're looking to stream the show, you're going to have AMC Plus, or maybe Apple TV, or anywhere that you purchase single one-off episodes as well. This show had a very interesting thing that you have to consider. Since AMC is cable, the viewership numbers are a lot lower. But the first
despite it being like basically TV monoculture, how people see it.
So the first season averaged around 900,000 people overall. per episode. And it was one of AMC's most successful TV shows ever. They moved it from a Thursday 10 p.m. slot to a Sunday 10 p.m. slot. Because
the HBO slot,
yeah, it wasn't competing with Grey's Anatomy. That's a big, gigantic one. Grey's Anatomy has own Thursdays. NBC had its Power Hour of comedy during 2007 and 2008 as well. And then the 5th season was its most successful, averaging about 2.61 million viewers per episode. So it tripled its viewership. Awards, 297 nominations, 79 wins. That includes 5 Golden Globes, 16 Emmys, 7 Writer Guilds, and many, many more. It also won some BAFTAs, which is insane for a U.S.-produced TV show. Everything is on DVD. There's a lot of them. Enjoy it. Go. They are plentiful. But here's my favorite fact in the history of the show. In a show about advertising, there were many, many products that were shown, brands that were talked about. There were only ever 4 paid product placements in this entire show's history. They were Jack Daniels, Heineken, Unilever, had multiple brands that they talked about, and the Hilton did a thank you to the show and actually gave them money because they mentioned the Hilton so many times. But
even though they made Conrad Hilton like a pretty like enigmatic weirdo,
and it was it was a thank you to, they actually gave the money for it. But so Heineken actually did, in the 2nd season for the final episode, they bought all of the advertising slots around the show because the main plot point was advertising around Heineken and introducing it to the US. Very, very cool stuff.
Interesting.
But that's the history of the show. And you know what? If you guys need more trivia than what Greg gave you, go read a book. Because I think that we're going to probably...
No. Reading cuts down on our listenership. No one read.
Listen to more episodes of us, or listen to the Bowery Boys if you want to listen to more about the history of New York. But let's just dive into our final 2 questions for each of you, which is, based off of the pilot, would you guys watch more of Mad Men? And, do you think a show like this, period piece based television that, seemingly is about an industry, but is disguised more so as a plot driven show, deserves a space on TV right now? And Rich, I'm going to start off with you.
I had like an itching feeling to watch the 2nd episode. I needed that 2nd episode badly, and boy did they figure out how to end this one, because that was it's so good. It's one of my favorite pilots of all time, and I think if we're trying to bring on, I would love to see another industry get the Mad Men treatment. I don't know what that would be necessarily. I don't think anything should keep coming from this particular franchise. I think it is a sealed off. This is a museum piece. Like, put it behind like bulletproof glass. This is it. Like, just don't do anything more to it. But yeah, I would be curious to see another industry get this kind, or industry/era get this kind of treatment.
Max, what about yourself?
Yeah, this is an easy yes for me. I want to keep watching. I'm the same way as Rich. Your fingers hovering over play next episode, and you're chopping at the bit too. As for whether or not you could make a show like this, I think that the version we're seeing right now, unfortunately, are so many shows that are leaning too much into remember this. And Mad Men's pilot is actually a lot less of that than I remember it being from when I was younger. Yeah. And they need to be stories about people told through a lens of a time or an industry. And yes, if you could figure out a way to do that effectively, 100%. But you need to avoid the pitfalls of just playing like remember the 60s.
I think having that much separation between 1960 and 2007 is like, that's the sweet spot. You want it to have like where nearly gone generations will remember this time, where they'll be around, but your key audience is going to have no recollection of this whatsoever. Having a show like Pen 15 around or whatever is like, yeah, this is for a nostalgia thing, but this is for an entirely different, we are so disconnected from this time at this point.
Yeah, and I'll finish us off. As far as watching the next episode, absolutely. If I didn't have to get my credit card out to pay for the next episode, I would have already been 5 episodes deep by now. As far as more of TV like this, it's a yes and no, right? I think Richie brought up a very, very important point, which is make sure you're not doing remember when. You're in this time period, this is the way things are, and focus on a industry that has changed so much that it does seem novel that we're doing certain things that we just don't do anymore. Whether that's like, I would be very interested in seeing if we did like the early days of computers, right? And what that industry was like, because it's entirely different now than it once was. But with all that being said, that is our flight, gentlemen. But before we send off our audience and land this plane, where can folks find you? Rich, where can folks find you?
Well, I love this podcast. I love this place. It's hot, loud, and filled with men. And you can all, I want you guys to come follow me at Damn That's Rich. You can find original sketch comedy. That's on Instagram. You can find original sketch comedy from Max and myself at Dadwagon Comedy on both Instagram and TikTok.
Max?
You can catch me ordering a Mai Tai in every single bar in Los Angeles. You can find me on all things social media at Maxwell Sig.
And you can catch me looking at poo-poo platters. Just, on...
Hashtag poo-poo platters.
Hashtag poo-poo platters. That's all my Instagram is going to be of these days. But if you're looking for
the P in TVPL stands for poo-poo platter.
God damn it. But if you're looking for me on social media and you want to see more of my favorite poo-poo platters, you can find me at Run Jeff Run. You can find the TV Pilot's License anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as YouTube and social media at TV Pilot's License. If you have a question about the show or for our next episode, shoot us an email at tvpilotslicense@gmail.com or give us a call at 213-290-1713. Make sure to watch out for some of the sneak previews of some of our upcoming episodes. But with the plane landed and the seatbelt signs off, we look forward to flying the bright skies of the TV world with you again soon. And until then,
it's toasted.
Nice.
See you, everyone. Don't smoke. Please don't smoke.
I don't know. Give it a try.